Chapter 10 of Geographical Reader, Europe, by Frank G. Carpenter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. Chapter 10, Rural France. We are in France this morning. We landed some days ago and are now leisurely traveling from city to city and village to village through one of the most interesting countries of Europe. How pleasant it is to be again upon the land! We shall never forget our trip across the Channel. It took us 2 hours on the railroad from London to Dover, where the English Channel is narrowest and where we got an express boat which carried us across to Calais in an hour. But such an hour! We never thought so much misery could be crowded into 60 short minutes. We were rolled and pitched about by the waves even more than on our voyage across the Atlantic. We could not walk upon deck and were seasick all the way over. We spent but a few hours in Calais, going first to the custom house to open our trunks, that the officials might see we had no goods for sale. We visited the shipyards, watched the French women making lace, and looked at the fortifications built to defend the port in the event of a war between England and France. For a similar reason, the English have fortifications in Dover. We took a train at the station not far from the boat, and since then have been traveling by rail from one place to another. How different it is from anything we have yet seen! The signs on the stations are strange. They are printed in French, and we have to translate the advertisements before we know what they mean. Our fellow passengers speak a strange language, gesturing much as they talk. We thought we knew something of French, but these people speak so fast we cannot make out the words. The conductor comes to the door and, touching his cap, calls out something we can hardly understand, for he runs his words all together. But the French passengers are showing their tickets, and we do the same. Listen to the crowd at the stations. They are all jabbering in French, and what really seems strangest is that the little children are speaking this language as easily as we do our own. How polite everyone is, and how jolly! Even the boys take off their hats when we ask them a question. Men shake hands when they meet, and again when they part, and boys often kiss the hands of their relatives when they greet them at the cars. Over there are 2 men embracing each other. They kiss on the cheeks, each pressing one kiss on each cheek of his fellow. Such salutations are common in France. The French are fond of society. We see women chatting and laughing as they sit with their knitting outside their houses. There are family parties about the tables in the parks, and in the streets in front of the cafes, playing dominoes or other games while they drink wine, chocolate, coffee, or lemonade. They seem to enjoy themselves very much. Many are reading the papers, for the French are intelligent and have all sorts of schools, as we shall see farther on. But there the bell rings. The train is leaving the station, and that ring is the notice to start. We are rapidly moving over the country. How comfortable it is! France has a good railroad system connecting its cities and towns with one another, and with all parts of Europe. See the woman there at the road crossing. She has a little red flag in her hand, which she waves at the engineer as he passes. She blows a horn to warn people that the cars are coming, and at the same time puts down the bars to keep them from crossing the track. How fine the farms are! But how small! France is largely composed of small farms. It is divided up into garden patches, and the most of it belongs to the common people. In the United Kingdom, which we have just left, the most of the lands were owned by 20,000 men, composed chiefly of the rich and the nobility. France is only a little less than twice as large as Great Britain and Ireland, but it has millions of landed proprietors. Nearly every farmer has his own bit of land, and even those who work for others own several acres apiece, which they tend between times. This is a good thing for France, for every owner feels that a part of the country belongs to him, and he is interested in its welfare. The people are fond of their country, and do not emigrate like the English, Irish, and Germans. They think no other place equal to France, and hence stay at home. Many foreigners come into France every year, but few Frenchmen go out. The people farm their lands well and are thrifty. The French are noted for their thrift. Nearly every one of them has money in the bank or in a stocking hidden away somewhere at home, and they are often said to be the richest people of the world. They have learned how to use food materials so economically that it is said they could take what we waste and by their knowledge of cooking live upon it. The common people we see dress plainly and look healthy and happy. Now we are traveling through one of the wheat regions. There are many such in the northern and central parts of the country. Besides wheat, the French produce quantities of oats, rye, barley, and corn, as well as sugar beets, potatoes, and other root crops. They have orchards of apples, peaches, and pears in the north, and in the south groves of lemon, orange, olive, and mulberry trees. There are many provinces in which we can go for miles and not be out of sight of the vineyards, for France is the chief wine-producing country of Europe. But let us leave the train and visit some of the farms. The road is as hard as stone and as smooth as a floor. We ride along under the shade of the poplars and other trees that line the roadsides. It is early morning, but the people are already at work. The women are laboring along with the men in the fields. Some of them are bareheaded, some have bright handkerchiefs about their heads, and some wear sunbonnets. They do all sorts of light work. There is one weeding among those sugar beets, and here is another cutting the thistles out of this field of green wheat. On the other side of the road a man is plowing. He wears a cap and a suit of blue cotton, with a long shirt or blouse buttoned down in front outside his trousers. He has on wooden clogs or sabots. In that field farther on 3 little boys are planting something. They are bareheaded, but they laugh as they work and say bonjour or good day to us as we pass. But where are the farmhouses and barns? There are none in the fields. The farm people of France live in villages and go out from them to their work. There is a village now about 3 miles away. Let us go to it. How different it is from our small country towns. The houses and barns are all mixed together. They are of 1 and 2 stories, built of stone or of mud mixed with straw, and roofed with red tiles or straw thatch. The walls are whitewashed, except near the ground, where there is a black coating of tar to keep out the damp. Each house has a stable and outsheds about it, and the stable is often a part of the house, the cow stalls being next to the bedroom or kitchen. Nearly every house has a rabbit yard connected with it. Rabbits are as common here as chickens are in our villages. One of the farmers invites us to enter his home. He takes us into the kitchen, which is the chief room of the house. It has a brick floor. There is a great fireplace at the end and a bed in one corner. Hams and sides of bacon hang from the ceiling, and there are some prints on the walls. Our farmer wears a cap, a blue blouse, blue trousers, and wooden shoes. His wife has on dark clothes and a white cap. She has a half-finished garment in her hand and sews as she talks. See that hand loom over there? Our hostess weaves cloth in the winter when she cannot work in the fields. Many of the women make beautiful laces and embroideries. Leaving the house, we stroll through the village, visiting its little church, and then drive on to a large country town, not far away. Let us stop before we go in and watch the women washing at that stream outside the town. Each woman has a wooden box or tray at the edge of the water, in which she kneels, and leaning over, dips in the clothes and rubs them clean upon the flat stones. There is a girl who is pounding the dirt out with a paddle. She has laid the blue cotton shirt she is washing upon a rock in the water, and is striking it again and again. Now she is dipping the garment into the stream, and now she has doubled it up to pound it again. Others have finished their washing and are hanging the clothes on the fence at the back or spreading them out on the grass to dry. This sort of washing is done all over France, although in some of the cities there are public laundries where the women may wash free of charge or for a few cents a day. In the town we find all sorts of work going on in the streets. The French are fond of open-air life. We see women and girls knitting and sewing on their house steps. Others nearby are cleaning vegetables for dinner, and farther on a girl is combing her hair right out on the street. It is the same with the men and the children. Tailors and shoemakers bring their work out to the sidewalks, school children bring their books home and study outdoors, and the little ones play all sorts of games in the streets. See that girl on that doorstep with her doll in her arms? What a pretty little French mother, and what a very odd doll. The doll's legs are wrapped round and round with a white cloth in a tight bundle. That is the way the live French babies are dressed, and the little girl could not imagine her baby real if it were in one of the long gowns our babies wear. We visit the public museum and the library, and then go into the schools. Every town in France has these institutions, for the French are among the most advanced of all nations in their learning and culture. They have many colleges and large universities, and are noted for their scientific and literary ability. We spend some time at the schoolhouses, smiling a little at the boys, who are dressed too much like girls to suit young Americans. Many quite large boys wear black dresses which fall below the knees of their trousers. Some of the boys have on stockings so short that they do not meet the ends of their knickerbockers, and a strip of red bare skin 8 inches wide shows. It makes us think of the soldiers we saw wearing kilts in the Highlands of Scotland. The teacher tells us the school hours are from 8 o'clock in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, with 2 hours for dinner. He shows us the school savings bank, in which the children can make deposits equal to 1 cent or more at a time, and says that the parents sometimes teach their children habits of saving by giving them money to put in the school bank, so that they may have a capital with which to start life when they leave school. These school banks are connected with the postal savings banks, and are so popular that hundreds of thousands of accounts have thus been opened by children. Our town is on the edge of a forest, and we take a long drive through the woods. How clean and well kept everything is! There is hardly a twig on the ground, not a rotten log or a stump to be seen. Even the bark of small trees is saved, and that of some kinds is stripped off and used to tie the sheaves of wheat and oats. There is a woman preparing such bark and putting it up in bundles for sale. Where the trees have been cut, they have been chopped off close to the ground, and every chip saved. Fuel is expensive in France, and the people do not waste it as we do. The wood is made up for sale in little bundles, not much bigger than a bundle of kindling wood, and in the cities it is often sold by weight. The French are always planting trees. They have a saying that every tree earns its own living. Every forest has its keeper, who can tell when a tree reaches the right age for firewood, and in the government forest it is forbidden by law to destroy the trees. The result is that, although France is a very old country, about 1/6 of it is still wooded. We meet one of the forest guards now and then during our drive, and when we propose to break off a stick for our cane, our coachman warns us that if we do so we may be arrested. End of chapter 10. Chapter 11 of Geographical Reader, Europe, by Frank G. Carpenter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. Chapter 11. Commercial and Manufacturing France. Let us look at France on the map, to learn, if we can, why it has been the home of one of the greatest of the European nations. The country consists of a great block of rolling plains, so guarded by mountains and seas that its inhabitants can easily defend it. There are the English Channel and the Atlantic Ocean on the north and the west, the Mediterranean and the mountain wall of the Pyrenees on the south, and the Alps, the Jura, and the Vosges on the east, so arranged that only a short chain of fortresses is needed to ward off a sudden attack. Is it not natural that a great nation should grow up inside such walls of mountains and water? Yes, and when the country within has good seaports, and also navigable rivers connected by many canals, we see that it is naturally fitted for commerce and trade. It has also coal and other minerals, and thousands of streams flow down from the mountains, giving water power to all sorts of factories. As we make our way from one great port to another, we shall see that all parts of France are connected by water, so that, notwithstanding the good railroad system, much of the freight still goes upon boats because it is cheaper. In some places the coal rate is 1 cent per ton per mile, while in others a ton of goods is carried 3 miles for a cent. We could, if we chose, visit all parts of France by the Seine, the Loire, the Rhone and Garonne, and the canals which connect them. The Burgundy Canal connects the Rhone, through its tributaries, with the Seine, and the Canal du Centre joins it to the Loire, while the Canal du Midi unites with the river Garonne and brings the waters of the Bay of Biscay and the Mediterranean together, so that boats can go from one to the other, and thus save the voyage of 2,000 miles around the Spanish peninsula. There is also a canal from the Seine to the Rhine, in which, by locks, the boats are lifted over a pass in the Vosges Mountains, more than 1,000 feet high. We visit the chief seaports of France, and find them filled with shipping from all parts of the world. At Havre, the port of Paris at the mouth of the Seine, we see steamers which have crossed the Atlantic from New York, with loads of our cotton, tobacco, and wheat to be sold to the French. There are ships from Brazil and other parts of South America, and also from the United Kingdom, Germany, and the many other countries with which France has a great trade. We spend some time in Bordeaux, near the mouth of the Garonne. It is larger than Louisville, and is a beautiful city. At its wharves are many vessels loading wines, and we learn that Bordeaux is the chief wine port of the world. The French raise grapes in nearly all parts of their country. They produce more wine than any other people, making enough annually to give a gallon to every man, woman, and child upon earth, and have plenty left for themselves. The French consume almost 1 billion gallons a year. Nearly everyone has wine with his dinner, and we see even the little children drinking wine with their lunches as we ride through France on the cars. We take a run from Bordeaux out into the country to look at the vineyards. They are much the same as in many other parts of France where fine wines are produced. There are vines everywhere, not trained upon arbors or lattice work, but tied to stakes about as high as your waist. Each vine has its own stake, the branches being cut almost down to the ground every year. Many of the hills are terraced, the rows of vines making green steps up the hillsides. See, there are women hoeing in the field over there. On that hill to the right they are weeding the vines, and tying them with strings to the stakes. Some of the women wear bonnets so deep we cannot see their faces, except when they look up. There are children at work in the vineyards, as well as women and men. On our return to Bordeaux, we visit the wine cellars. They are to be found in every part of the city. We walk through cave after cave, filled with great casks and thousands of bottles carefully arranged upon shelves. Such cellars are common in all the wine centers. At Bordeaux, we take the express train for Marseille, the chief port of southern France on the Mediterranean Sea. For miles there is nothing but vineyards on both sides of the track. Now we pass an orange orchard, and now see pale yellow lemons gleaming out through the green leaves. There are dark green olive trees and semi-tropical plants. There are men, women, and children at work everywhere. The women wear white caps and woolen dresses with short skirts. Even the children wear wooden shoes. There is a drove of little donkeys, each carrying 2 panniers of vegetables or fruits to the market. Farther on are some mules at work in a field. Everywhere there are roses and other beautiful flowers. There is so much to see that we are almost sorry when we reach the end of our journey. We spend some days at Marseille. It is the outlet for the trade of the rich Rhone Valley, and for all France to the Mediterranean and the Far East. It is as big as Pittsburgh, and owing to its excellent harbor and the busy and rich French people about it, is the chief port of the Mediterranean Sea. We take the cars at Marseille and travel northward through the valley of the Rhone to Lyons, at the head of the navigation of the Rhone, where the turbulent Saône flows into it. We are now in what is, next to Paris, the chief manufacturing city of France, and in a city where more silks are woven than anywhere else in the world. The French make more of those goods than any other nation of Europe, and in this city there are thousands of men, women, and children who do nothing else but make silk thread and weave silk. Lyons is as big as Buffalo, and it has become great chiefly from its silk manufactures. Let me tell you how the business started. Until the latter part of the Middle Ages, Europe got the most of its fine silks from Italy, but a few years after Columbus discovered America, Francis I, then King of France, sent out word to the silk weavers of Europe that if they would come to France they should have more rights than other workmen. He said that they should pay no taxes, their lodgings should be free, and they should have the right to wear swords, a privilege at that time seldom accorded to any but the nobles. The result was that many Italian weavers came to Lyons, which through its industrial fairs was already noted as a trading place. They first wove thick silk goods and brocaded velvets, such as they had made at home, but afterward lighter silks were manufactured. The French soon learned silk weaving. They made all sorts of new designs until at last it came about that the most beautiful of all cloths were made by them. In the meantime, Paris became the center of European fashion and art, and merchants from all nations went there to get new fabrics and styles, until it was found that if a pattern or style originated in Paris, it was pretty sure to sell well everywhere. This is the position which the French hold in the world today. They are supposed to know what is beautiful better than any other nation, and they are always inventing new styles. We visit schools in Lyons where designing is taught, and where any one who will pay can learn how to weave the most beautiful silks, satins, and velvets, if he will only apply himself. These schools have students from all parts of the world. But where does France get the silk thread to weave those fine goods? Some of it, as we saw in Marseilles, is imported from Asia, but much is produced right here in the Rhone Valley. In southern France there are many orchards of mulberry trees, whose leaves are used for feeding silkworms. The people pick off the leaves and lay them upon boards, where the worms, having been carefully hatched from the eggs of the silk moth, are lying. After the worms begin to eat they must be kept supplied with food, and the people are often up all night tending them. At such times you can hear the worms chewing, the thousands of little jaws of a large colony making a peculiar noise. They grow very rapidly, and after a time stop eating and spin their cocoons, from which the silk threads are afterwards reeled off by machinery and by hand. Leaving Lyons, we visit other silk weaving towns. There are many in France, for it is a great manufacturing country, and there is scarcely a village that is not noted for some industry or another. We spend some time in the thriving city of St. Etienne. It is on the swift river Furens, in the midst of coal fields, where the water power and cheap fuel have caused numerous factories to spring up. It might be called the Sheffield of France, for it makes all kinds of fine cutlery, manufacturing 5,000 knives every week. We are more interested, however, in the ribbons. St. Etienne weaves more ribbons than any other place in the world. It produces more than half of all the ribbons of Europe, and I think there are many girls in our party who have St. Etienne ribbons upon them. There are many thousand people here who work only on ribbons, many millions of dollars' worth of such goods being annually exported. Let us enter some of the establishments. Many of them consist of a single hand loom in the home of the weaver. How pale and wan the work people look, and how their tired faces stand out in contrast with the bright threads they are using. They must work very carefully upon the best ribbons, and some of them labor many hours a day for wages much lower than those paid in our country. How beautiful the ribbons are! They are of all kinds. Some have flowers and birds raised in satin on soft silken grounds. There are ribbons of gold and ribbons of silver, ribbons decorated with all sorts of leaves, and ribbons as wonderful in their colors as a peacock's tail, all made in these mean little homes. We next visit some of the towns where they make lace. There is one not far from St. Etienne where nearly every family is engaged in this work, and where in one little district There are more than 100,000 lace workers. Most of them are women, but there are many small children knitting away. We often see the workers sitting in the street outside their houses, plying their reels, and even find them in the marketplaces and on the church steps. They are making the torchon lace, which is sold all over the world. Some of the most delicate patterns are stitched upon pillows, while others are put together with needles. The centers of the woolen and linen industries of France are also quite interesting. We have all heard of Lisle thread gloves and stockings, and we wish to visit the place where they are made. This is at Lisle, a city of 200,000 people in northeastern France. Cambrics are made at the town of Cambrai, not far from Lisle. There are curious manufacturing villages in the Jura and Vosges mountains, little Pittsburghs walled in by hills, each of which has its blackened chimneys and clouds of coal smoke. One town produces nothing but clocks, another makes nails, and a third, strange to say, devotes itself to the study of noses. In the last, the people are all engaged in manufacturing spectacles, making them so they will fit the long nose, the short nose, and no nose at all, people all the world over. But there is one thing we must see before we go on to Paris, and that is how they make china. The French are noted for their beautiful porcelains. You will find their wares in almost any town of our country, the plates or dishes being stamped with the name of the place of their manufacture. Many of the finest bear the word Limoges. That town is one of the centers of the porcelain manufacture of France, and there we shall go. Limoges lies in the south-central part of the country, near some rich coal mines, and close to the beds of fine, white clay of which the china is made. We watch them dig the clay from the earth and follow it to the mills, where it is ground very fine. It is next mixed with water into a stiff paste, and this paste is treated in certain ways until it becomes a mass not unlike bread dough after kneading. The workmen take the white dough and mold it into all sorts of beautiful dishes, vases, and other such things, which are then put into kilns and burnt until they are as hard as glass, when they are taken out and cooled. Some of the dishes are painted, and some are decorated with gold. Some are as thin as an eggshell, and so translucent that we can almost see through them. Later on in our tour we visit St. Cloud, near Paris, where the famous Sèvres ware is made. The factory there has been in the hands of the government for more than 100 years, its chief object being to design beautiful things for the benefit of private manufacturers. While we are in the works we see a tea set worth $3,000, and copies of famous pictures on porcelain, some of which sell for as much as $10,000 apiece. They are very beautiful, but far too costly for us. End of chapter 11. Chapter 12 of Geographical Reader, Europe, by Frank G. Carpenter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. Chapter 12. The Most Beautiful City of the World. Let us stand together on the top of the Eiffel Tower and take a look over Paris before we begin to explore it. We are 900 feet above the ground on a great framework of iron, rising upon the banks of the Seine in the midst of the most beautiful city of the world. Below us lies a vast network of cream-colored houses, built in regular lines along wide streets which cross one another in almost every direction. There is a wall around the edges, and with the glass we can see many forts with soldiers moving about on the ramparts. Paris has been compared to a camp. It is about 22 miles in circumference and is the largest city of continental Europe. Look down upon it and see how clean everything is. Notice the very wide streets. They are walled with magnificent buildings and lined with great forest trees. Those are the famous boulevards of Paris. Each of them has sidewalks as wide as the ordinary roadway, and the space between is paved with asphalt or smooth wooden blocks. The streets are washed with a hose every morning. They are swept and mopped, and in the evening the rag pickers go about and pick up the scraps of paper, cloth, and other things which fall during the day. See how the river winds its way through the city, and how the water sparkles under the rays of the sun. It is so far down that the many boats upon it look like toys, and the men on the quays like pygmies hanging over little stone walls. That is the Seine. It flows from here down to the sea, with a deep channel most of the way, and this has been so dug out that ships that do not draw more than 10 feet of water can come right up to Paris. This has made Paris the chief port of France, although it is situated 100 miles from the coast. There are boats there below us which have come from London and the other ports of northern Europe. There are always boats floating down from the upper parts of the Seine, and if we should travel up the Marne, which joins the Seine just outside Paris, we might find a canal by which we could go clear to the Rhine, where other boats would take us out through Belgium and Holland to the North Sea. What a number of railroads there are coming into Paris from every direction! This is the railroad center of France. You can get fast trains here any day for any capital of Europe. 7 hours will take you across the Channel to London. We could leave now and be in Berlin in the morning, or going on reach St. Petersburg, the capital of Russia, by day after tomorrow. That train which is shooting off to the south is bound for the Mediterranean. There goes another on its way to Switzerland, and there are other roads in that network of steel which extend on to the Rhine and the Danube, carrying the fast Oriental Express, by which one can go from Paris to Constantinople in less than 3 days. Cast your eyes down to the Seine. See that little island farther on up the river, with the great church upon it? That is the Ile de la Cité, upon which the Parisis, a tribe of half-savage men, had their chief town when Caesar subdued this part of Gaul, almost 2,000 years ago. Caesar conquered the Parisis and rebuilt the town. It became an important settlement under the Romans, and centuries later was made the capital of France, having been the residence of the French kings for almost 1,000 years. But let us go down and begin our explorations of Paris. We take carriages and drive for miles through one beautiful street after another, all walled with cream-colored buildings of 5 and 6 stories. The buildings are in blocks, built close to the inner edge of the sidewalk, and they look so much alike that we wonder that a Parisian does not sometimes lose his way and go into the house of his neighbor. There are no gardens except at the back of the houses or in little courts inside them. Each building contains many families. The Parisians live in flats or apartments, and even in the best sections of the city there are stores on the ground floor, with homes on the floors higher up. One family will have 5 or 6 rooms. It may be a dining room, parlor, and kitchen, with 2 or 3 bedrooms, all on the same floor, and many must climb 3 or 4 pairs of stairs every time they go indoors or out. This is one reason why we see so many people on the streets and in the parks. The French love the open air, and as most of them can have no gardens of their own, they come to the boulevards and walk up and down. There are benches on the streets where we see women knitting, and there are crowds walking in the public gardens at almost every time of the day. Girls take their sewing out on the streets and chat and work while they watch the people go by. We see women stitching and knitting outdoors. They knit even while riding on the streetcars, and we are rarely out of sight of a woman working away at a stocking. Each of the public gardens and parks looks as though a picnic was being held in it, especially on Sunday afternoons, when many families eat their lunches under the trees. We drive to the Arc de Triomphe and drive through the Champs-Élysées to the Place de la Concorde. The Arc de Triomphe is one of the most beautiful monuments of the world. It was begun by the great Napoleon in 1806 to commemorate the glories of the French in some of their wars. We are delighted with the Champs-Élysées. There are beautiful gardens with a magnificent avenue bordered with trees running through them. Every afternoon the avenue is crowded with carriages and men and women on horseback, and under the trees on each side children are playing all sorts of games. There are little booths where toys and cakes and candies are sold, and there are merry-go-rounds and Punch and Judy shows. But there is so much to see that we leave our carriage and walk down the avenue. Isn't it interesting to watch the French children playing? They are romping about almost as lively as little Americans, and we cannot help wishing we knew enough French to stop and play with them. Those chairs along the shady side of the walk are not free. If you sit down in one, it will cost you a penny, whether you sit there an hour or a minute. It is only the benches that are free to the public. But here we are in the Place de la Concorde. How beautiful it is! I dare say we shall not see anything so fine elsewhere on our travels. We are surrounded by gardens and parks and beautiful buildings. There at the east is the Garden of the Tuileries, where the kings of France used to live, and just beyond are the Grand Museum and Art Gallery of the Louvre, one of the finest of its kind in the world. At the west, as far as we can see, runs the Champs-Élysées, with the great Arc de Triomphe on the hill in the distance, while on the south is the Seine, with its boats of all kinds puffing along to and fro, with the palace of the Chamber of Deputies on the opposite bank. Now let us turn our backs to the Seine and look in the opposite direction. That tall round pillar, with Napoleon's statue on top, rising high out of the houses, is the Column Vendôme, made from the cannon which Napoleon captured from the Austrians and Russians, and that church to the left is the Madeleine, one of the most beautiful of the whole world. A little farther on our eyes catch the roof of the Opera House, another magnificent structure, while near us in the Place are beautiful fountains, the great obelisk brought here from Egypt, and statues representing the chief towns of France. But let us go for a walk on the boulevards. They are filled with people laughing and chatting. There are many fashionably dressed men and women moving along arm in arm. There are laborers in blue cotton walking this way and that. Newsboys are crying their papers, girls are peddling flowers, and hawkers are selling pictures, toys, and all sorts of knickknacks. We pass crowds of people eating and drinking out on the sidewalks. There are cafes at every few steps, and most of them have more customers without than within. Families are chatting as they eat and drink. Many men are reading the papers, and not a few boys are playing dominoes at tables out in the street. What fine store windows! The boulevards are lined with shops, and as we go along we seem to be walking through a great exposition. Paris is celebrated for its beautiful wares, known as articles de Paris. It makes the finest of furniture, clocks, silverware, bronzes, and pictures. We pass many jewelry stores where precious stones set in all shapes are spread upon purple velvet cushions behind the plate glass, and stay for a time in the great department stores and wander out among so many fascinating knickknacks and fine goods of all kinds that we do not wonder that people from everywhere come to Paris to shop. We have trouble in tearing away the girls of our party from the millinery and dressmaking establishments, for the latest styles in hats and gowns come from Paris, and they think anything they buy here is sure to be new. We next visit the Halles Centrales to see something of the markets of Paris. The French have great respect for their stomachs, and the best of everything comes to the capital. The Halles Centrales are the largest markets of the city. They are great pavilions of iron and glass, covering all told about 20 acres. It is early morning, and we find the markets already crowded with women dressed in white caps and short petticoats, and men in caps and blue blouses, all gathered about little pens where the supplies for the day are being sold at auction. We stop before a stall where they are selling chickens at wholesale. That Frenchman in white cap and apron behind the counter is the auctioneer, and the black-dressed woman beside him is his cashier and bookkeeper. Nearly all the buyers are women, who bob their white-capped heads up and down as they shout out their bids, shaking their hands at the auctioneer as they do so. The chickens are brought to the stall in crates on the heads of porters, and disposed of at the rate of a crate to the minute. Through one pavilion after another we go, past crowds who are buying eggs, butter, and cheese, jostled now and then by the market women rushing hither and thither, and by blue-bloused porters who are carrying great loads of vegetables and meat on their heads. In another pavilion we see women selling baskets of live rabbits, and in another stall farther off oysters and snails and frog legs. We ask a snail seller about her business, and are told that 1,000,000 pounds of snails are sold here every year. They are esteemed a great delicacy, and when ready for eating bring about 1 franc a dozen. Many are imported from Switzerland, and many come from the vineyards of France. A little later the retail market begins. The thousands of stalls have been trimmed up for the day, and all wares are neatly displayed. The officer in charge tells us that the food sold at wholesale alone brings in more than $100,000 a day, and that the supplies come from all parts of France, from North Africa, and from all over Europe. He shows us reindeer from Norway, mutton from England, eggs from Belgium, and bread made of wheat grown in the United States. How queer the bread is! It is baked in loaves about as long and as thick as a baseball club, so long that they reach high above the head of that boy who is carrying some home. Let us buy one and taste it. Is it not good? Yes, the French cook everything well. We have not tasted frog legs and snails, but our everyday meals are delicious. We soon become fond of the French way of living, although it is different from ours. We enjoy the light breakfast of a cup of coffee, 2 rolls of bread, and a pat of unsalted butter. This we have upon rising. It is the breakfast of well-to-do people all over France. The poor eat still less at this time. Many have nothing but a piece of dry bread and a glass of cold water. Some well-to-do people take their breakfasts in bed, and at our hotel we are told that we may have coffee in our bedrooms without extra charge. The next meal comes about noon. The French call it breakfast with the fork. It consists of meat and vegetables, with sometimes a soup, and it is usually quite as good as our midday dinner at home. The people eat slowly, and in parts of South France 2 hours are set aside for this meal, when even the business men stop work for lunch and a nap, or a chat with their friends. The chief meal of the day, however, is dinner. This comes in the evening, when every one eats as well as his purse can afford, even the poor having a soup, vegetables, and some kind of meat and a dessert. Among the well-to-do, the dinner consists of a half-dozen courses or more, the plates being changed at each course, and only 1 piece of meat or 1 vegetable brought on at a time. Such a meal usually ends with a small cup of black coffee. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13 of Geographical Reader, Europe, by Frank G. Carpenter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. Chapter 13. More about Paris. How France is governed. We are delighted with Paris. Everything is bright and gay. The city is a vast treasury of industry and art, and there is something worth seeing wherever we go. We stroll through palace after palace, filled with pictures, and in the great museums of the Louvre grow so tired of the long galleries walled with fine paintings that we are glad to leave them for the garden of the Tuileries and the children playing on the Champs-Élysées. We make excursions to Fontainebleau and Versailles in the suburbs of Paris, where in times past the monarchs of France had vast country homes surrounded by extensive gardens and forests. Their palaces still stand, and we repeople them with the scenes of French history as we wander from bedroom to bedroom and parlor to parlor, now sitting in a chair where Napoleon Bonaparte sat, and now patting the cradle-like bed where his little son, the King of Rome, lay when he was a baby. We go through the rooms where Marie Antoinette and the Empress Josephine lived, and admire their gorgeous furniture and the beautiful paintings which look down from the walls. At Fontainebleau we take a drive through the forest, stopping at the fish pond near the palace to watch the carp swimming about. An old Frenchwoman in a white cap and blue gown comes up with some bread. We buy a loaf, break it in pieces, and throw them into the water. The great fish rush for the bread. They push each other about and fight for the crumbs, even as the nobles fought with one another for the favors of the kings who once lived in that palace. Returning to Paris, we make a trip underground. About one-tenth of the city is built over catacombs, great cellar-like caves made by digging out the stone from the deep-lying quarries. More than a century ago some of the buildings above these caves began to sink in, and the government decided to use the catacombs as tombs. They strengthened the roofs and divided the caves into rooms, filling them with the bones of the dead from the cemeteries of Paris. The cemeteries were centuries old, and so full that it is estimated that the skeletons of 3,000,000 people were taken from them to these catacombs. We are led by our guide down the steps into the caves and are shown chapels walled with human bones. The sight is a horrible one, and we pant for pure air. Leaving the catacombs, we spend part of the day in going through the sewers, taking a boat and riding for miles through one great tunnel after another. We are below the water mains, in tunnels so big that a railroad train could run through them without touching the walls or the roofs. A wide waterway with pavements on the sides runs along the bottom, so that we can leave the boat and walk along away down here under the great city. The water comes from the Seine, and it moves so fast that there is no perceptible odor. Paris has about 800 miles of such tunnels, so many that if they were placed end to end they would reach as far as from New York to Detroit. They have cost a vast sum, but they have made Paris healthful. We finish our underground journey near the Church of the Madeleine, in one of the gayest parts of gay Paris, and our eyes are dazzled as we come again to the street. We stop at the flower market at the side of the church and buy bouquets of the little old women in white caps and clean calicoes, who sit there behind counters and chat with their customers. We spend a few minutes in the Madeleine and later on visit Notre Dame, another famous church, and then go to the Pantheon, where many of the noted Frenchmen are buried, and from there go to the Hôtel des Invalides to take a look at the Tomb of Napoleon. The Hôtel des Invalides was founded centuries ago as a home for the old soldiers of France. It is situated on the south side of the Seine and is inhabited by many French veterans, one of whom acts as our guide. He leads us into the church and shows us the great circular crypt under the dome where Napoleon's sarcophagus lies. We lean over the marble balustrade and look down upon an immense block of red dish brown granite, 13 feet long, 14 feet high, and 6 feet wide, resting on a pedestal of polished green stone. It is a gigantic coffin which was cut from one solid block in the quarries of Sweden, and brought here at an enormous expense. The crypt is floored with mosaic, decorated with crowns of laurel in stone. There are monuments about it, and the old soldier points out this quotation from Bonaparte's will, which is carved on its entrance: "I desire that my ashes may repose on the banks of the Seine, in the midst of the French people whom I have ever loved." We have seen monuments and pictures of Napoleon not only in Paris, but in all the cities of France. He is the greatest of the French heroes, and as you read more of history you will learn how wonderful his life story was. He was born of well-to-do parents in the little French island of Corsica, in the Mediterranean Sea, and began his studies in a military school. Later he entered the army in Paris and was made a lieutenant. He rapidly rose from one rank to another, until at last he commanded the whole of the French army, having proved himself the greatest general of Europe. He became emperor of the French, and as such waged wars with the other nations of Europe, conquering them one after another, until at last it seemed that he might make himself ruler of the whole world. Then there was a combination of the Russians, Germans, English, and Austrians against him. They joined armies and finally defeated him. They drove him from France, telling him that he might be the emperor of the island of Elba, a little place not so big as Corsica, for the rest of his life. This was in 1814. About a year later, Napoleon slipped out of Elba and came back to France. As soon as he landed, his old soldiers flocked to him from all parts of the country. The French government gave its support, and he soon had another large army. He marched against the powers which had defeated him, and a great battle took place at Waterloo in Belgium, where Napoleon, although he fought very bravely, was finally defeated. After that his enemies resolved that Napoleon was too dangerous a character to be allowed any freedom whatever. They decided to keep him a prisoner for life. They banished him to the rocky little island of St. Helena in the Atlantic Ocean off the west coast of Africa, and kept him guarded there until he died. He was buried in St. Helena, but years afterwards his remains were brought back to France and placed in this tomb. During Napoleon's time France became the greatest empire of Europe. It is now a republic in which the people elect their own rulers and govern themselves. The French have a president, just as we have, and their laws are made by a Senate and Chamber of Deputies, the latter corresponding to our House of Representatives. It is but a few steps from the Hôtel des Invalides to the Palace of the Chamber of Deputies, a magnificent building on the banks of the Seine. We stroll along the river to the palace, and going by the colossal statues of Prudence and Justice at the entrance, walk up the stairs to the front doors. We present our cards of admission from the American minister to Paris to one of the guards, and he gives us seats in the gallery of the Legislative Hall, from where we can look down upon the chief branch of the Congress of France. The room is in the shape of a half moon. The members sit in semicircular rows, rising one above the other to the back of the chamber. The president, who holds the same position as our Speaker of the House of Representatives, sits on a rostrum in front. Notice that little desk in front of the president. One of the members has just left his seat and gone into it. He is addressing the chamber, but he is speaking in French, and so rapidly that we cannot understand what he says. Now he is finished, and another man has taken his place. In our Congress, the members rise at their seats when they address the House, but here everyone speaks from that desk. Watch the man who is talking. See how he gesticulates and how excited he is. Now he is interesting his fellows. They are clapping their hands and making even more fuss than the members of the House of Commons did the day we were there. The president raps on his desk with a paper knife and calls order, but the men do not mind him. See, he has taken a silver bell and is ringing it. Several members are shouting for order, and we wish we knew enough French to understand the cause of all this commotion. Leaving the Chamber of Deputies, we go to the Senate and the Palace of the Luxembourg, and then crossing the Seine, make a short call upon the President of France in his official palace on the Champs-Élysées. From him and other officials, we learn that France is very well governed, although many of its methods are different from ours. The President, for instance, is chosen not by the people through an electoral college as in the United States, but by the majority vote of the Senate and Chamber of Deputies. His term lasts 7 years, and his salary, including the amount given him for entertaining, is 5 times as much as that of our President. He has a cabinet like our President, but, while the President of the United States may select any American citizen to be one of his ministers, the French President must choose his cabinet from the Chamber of Deputies. He may conclude treaties with other powers, but must not declare war unless Congress assents, and every one of his acts must be countersigned by a minister. We call upon the ministers, who give us many details in regard to the government. The Minister for the Colonies gives us maps showing the enormous possessions and dependencies which France has outside Europe. They have a total area larger than the whole United States, or more than 16 times as large as France itself. End of chapter 13. Chapter 14 of Geographical Reader, Europe, by Frank G. Carpenter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. Chapter 14. Belgium, the busiest workshop of Europe. We have left France and are traveling through Belgium. How busy it is and how crowded! The farms are small and the farmhouses are scattered so thickly over the landscape that the country seems one vast town. each little farmhouse having its big garden about it. The people are everywhere working. Women and men are spading the fields. Many women are hoeing and weeding. We see them doing all sorts of farm work, and pass many fields in which they are cutting the grass and throwing it about, making hay. There are no fences. The crops of wheat, oats, rye, and flax stand out like the patches of a crazy quilt as we ride through them. The Belgians are the best of farmers, and they cultivate their little land so well that it produces more to the acre than almost any other part of Europe. What excellent roads! They are even better than the highways of France. Many are paved with stone blocks fitted closely together, and some are shaded by great forest trees which seem centuries old. The farmhouses and barns are low, one-story buildings roofed with red tile or gray thatch. See those children going along with their mother? They all wear wooden shoes. This is so of most of the poor people of Belgium, and also of those of Holland and many parts of northern Europe. Now we are passing a little city, half hidden in smoke, and we see almost everywhere the smokestacks of manufacturing towns standing out against the blue sky. Even in the farm districts we are rarely beyond the hum of weaving machinery or the din and buzz of mills making all sorts of things out of iron and steel. Belgium is one of the great workshops of Europe. It is only 1/4 as big as Pennsylvania and about 1/18 as big as France. But nevertheless it is quite important in its commerce and trade. It is easy to see why this is so. Belgium has such rich soil that its people can raise nearly all their own food, and in the south it is so underlaid with iron and coal that it can have all sorts of factories. It has also many railroads, good waterways, and excellent seaports at Ostend and Antwerp, so that it can easily ship goods to and from all parts of the world. In addition to this, it is surrounded by people who are glad to buy what it makes. On the south live the rich, thrifty French, and on the east the Germans, while on the north in Holland are the Dutch, another rich business nation. The English are just across the Channel, and railroads connect the country with the Rhine and all parts of Europe. In addition, the Belgians are noted for their industry and their skill in handling machinery. They were famous as manufacturers even before the discovery of America, when their cities were among the richest in Europe. During the Middle Ages, Antwerp was almost as important as London, and ships from everywhere came there for fine goods. Then 1,000 vessels could be seen at one time in the river Scheldt, and 500 loaded wagons passed daily through the gates of the city. The people then made so much money in weaving fine cloths, in other industries, and in commerce, that the leading men dressed in velvets and satins. They had their guilds or trades unions, and in the great cities we shall see the old town halls, magnificent buildings put up at that time. The burgomasters or mayors of the principal towns were very proud. It is related that when they once went to Paris to pay homage to King John of France, they were displeased because they were not furnished cushions at one of the banquets held in their honor. They wished to show the French how they felt, and, as the story goes, took off their velvet cloaks all covered with embroidery and sat upon them. When the banquet was over, they left their cloaks on the seats. They were reminded that they had forgotten their cloaks, whereupon one of them scornfully answered, "We Flemish are not accustomed to carry our cushions away from dinner." In traveling about we find that the Belgians are still making beautiful cloth. They have large woolen and linen mills at Ghent and elsewhere, and also factories in which thousands of women and girls are weaving cotton from our southern states. We go to Liège, where there are large ironworks, to Tournai to see Brussels carpets made, and to Brussels and Mechelen to study the manufacture of lace. Belgium produces some of the finest lace of the world. Its soil and climate are especially suited for flax. It grows almost everywhere. We travel through fields where roughly dressed men and women wearing wooden shoes are kneeling, weeding the flax, and through villages where they are breaking it and turning it into thread for linen and lace. There are thousands of women and girls in Belgium who do nothing else but make lace. and in some places almost all are engaged in this work. The lace is made upon pillows, the design being marked out with pins. Every worker has her own pillow, and only one can work on one piece at a time. The threads are wound in and out through the pins, over and under, making the lace. The finer pieces require months, for in some of them 800 different threads are needed, and a girl may be weeks in making one handkerchief. Some lace is white and some black. It is of many different grades, each of which has its own name. Much of it is made into vests, collars, and cuffs, some into fans, and some into dresses for babies and brides, a fine lace dress often costing as much as $10,000. We are shown lace fans worth $50 apiece, and find it easy to hold in one hand $100 worth of very fine lace. We spend some time at Brussels, the chief industrial city of Belgium, and also its capital. It has long been noted for its beauty and has so many fine buildings that it reminds us of Paris. We walk along the boulevards, watching the people chatting at the tables outside the cafes, and stop to buy some lace at the principal stores in the Boulevard Anspach. This street is one of the finest of Brussels, and strange to say, it is built over a river. When the city was first started, it was on the banks of the Seine, but the people thought it unhealthful to have an open stream running right through the town, so they built a wall over it and covered it with stone and earth, and now you have to go out of the city to know that a river runs through it. Later on we visit the palace of the king, spend a few hours in the Belgian Parliament, and drive through the great park outside the town. We go to the museums and the markets, asking questions everywhere, but even those of us who speak French have great difficulty in making ourselves understood. Many of the Belgians understand neither French nor English, and more than one half of them speak Flemish, which is somewhat like a mixture of German and Dutch. The other part speak French, but even they have many strange words, and it is only when we meet the people of the educated classes that we can make ourselves understood. The Belgians have been greatly affected by the nations about them. In the south and in the cities they are much like the French. They speak more French than Flemish, and, like the French, they are fond of music and dancing. Every large town has its park where, on holidays, the bands play and the people walk about or dance. Every city has its amateur musical clubs, and Bruges, Antwerp, and Ghent have annual musical contests where the best performers get prizes. We are delighted with the chimes. Belgium is a land of fine bells. They are rung not only in the church steeples, but also in the towers of the town halls, some towers having as many as 100 bells which are rung in chimes every day. In the large cities, the bell ringer is an accomplished musician who plays upon the bells using keys like those of an organ, except that they are much larger. The work is so hard that the performer wears thick leather gloves, and it takes so much strength that even a strong man becomes exhausted at playing the bells in a quarter of an hour. In northern Belgium the people are more like the Hollanders, and we need an interpreter almost everywhere, for they use many Dutch words. We make an excursion from Brussels out to the battlefield of Waterloo, where Napoleon and the French were defeated by the Allied armies under the Duke of Wellington in 1815. It is only a half hour by train and a short ride by carriage to the bottom of the great hill which has been thrown up in the center of the battlefield as a monument of the event. On the top of this hill, on a pedestal of granite, a bronze lion, the emblem of Belgium, has been erected. We climb up and stand beside the lion while our guide describes the stirring scenes of the battle. The country all about is covered with green. The land is now cultivated close up to the hill, and as we watch the farmers working so peacefully among their crops, we cannot realize that upon that same ground was fought one of the greatest battles of history. We ask our guide about the battle, and he describes it in vivid language, although he evidently favors the French. He tells us just how the battle should have been fought, and apparently thinks that if he had been present to advise Napoleon, the French might have conquered. He tells us how the people in Brussels expected Napoleon to conquer, and how they were surprised at the news of his defeat, repeating Byron's poem describing Brussels on the eve of the battle. There was a sound of revelry by night, and Belgium's capital had gathered then, her beauty and her chivalry and bright. The lamps shone o'er fair women and brave men. 1,000 hearts beat happily, and when music arose with its voluptuous swell, soft eyes looked love to eyes which spake again, and all went merry as a marriage bell. But hush! Hark! A deep sound strikes like a rising knell. Did ye not hear it? No, 'twas but the wind, or the car rattling o'er the stony street. On with the dance! Let joy be unconfined. No sleep till morn, when youth and pleasure meet, to chase the growing hours with flying feet. But hark! That heavy sound breaks in once more, as if the clouds its echo would repeat, and nearer, clearer, deadlier than before. Arm! Arm! It is! It is! The cannon's opening roar. The other verses describe how the terrified Belgians acted, and also some features of the battle. It takes us just an hour to go from Brussels to Antwerp, the great port of Belgium. It is situated on the river Scheldt, about 60 miles from the sea, and has a harbor almost as large as that of London. We walk along the magnificent docks made by Napoleon I, passing steamers from the United States, England, Africa, and all parts of Europe. We visit the great cathedral, where we see the famous pictures made by Rubens, who was born in Antwerp. Then we take a train to Holland. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15 of Geographical Reader, Europe, by Frank G. Carpenter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. Chapter 15, A Country Below the Sea. How would you like to live not far from the ocean, in a land below the level of the sea, where the fishes swimming at the surface outside are higher up than your head, and where the ships are even with your second-story windows? This is the nature of a great part of the Netherlands. The word Netherlands means lowlands, and Holland may be derived from hollow land. Lying at the western end of the great plain which extends across Europe from the Ural Mountains to the North Sea, the country was formed by the earth washings from the Alps and highlands of Germany and France, brought down by the Rhine, the Maas, and the Scheldt. The land is so low that these streams have been walled in to prevent the spring floods from covering it, and enormous dikes, or embankments, of wood, stone, and earth have been built along the coast to keep the sea from rushing in and drowning the people. Less than one half of the country is so high that no walls are needed. The rest is the result of a long fight between the Dutch people and their enemy, the sea. The dikes are their fortifications made to keep old Neptune out. They have been centuries in tearing their land away from the waters. Acre by acre, farm by farm, township by township, and county by county, they have wrested it from the sea, until now they have one of the best little countries of Europe. They accomplished it this way. First they marked out a certain piece of swampy land, and put walls about it, and then pumped up the water by windmills into canals, so that at last it flowed out into the ocean. They made ditches to drain the enclosed land, and when it became dry, they cut it up into fields, planted trees, and built houses. Then they marked out another piece, and reclaimed that the same way. They had to keep the pumps going, and we shall see windmills everywhere tossing their huge arms about, raising the water, for it requires thousands of windmills and many steam pumps to keep Holland dry. We shall see how the fight with the ocean is still going on when we visit the dikes, and how the brave Dutch are ever victorious. They are getting more land every year, and they are now building dikes to drain the Zuider Zee, a great bed of shallow water 3/4 as big as the state of Rhode Island. Is not this wonderful? It seems even more wonderful as we go along the coast and see how the great dikes are built. Most of them are as tall as a 3-story house, and so wide that two carriages could easily be driven upon them side by side without touching. There are so many dikes in Holland that if they could be lifted up, placed end to end, and dropped down upon our country, they would make a great wall reaching from Boston clear across the Appalachian Mountains to Chicago, and on to the Mississippi River, across Iowa to the Missouri, and hundreds of miles on into Nebraska. In making a dike, the first thing is to get a foundation. Great forest trees are trimmed off and driven down deep into the sand in two wide rows facing the sea. These mighty fences are walled with planks which are studded with an armor of flat-headed nails, so that the teredo, the wood-eating sea worm, cannot get at them. Now, huge blocks of granite or other stone, brought mostly on ships from Norway, are thrown in between the walls, and on the top earth is added, and so, gradually, a great rampart is built up. Some of the dikes are faced with masonry, and others have walls of basket work to hold in the stone and earth. Trees are planted on top, and grass is sown upon the top and sides, that the roots may aid in binding the whole together. The dikes are carefully guarded. During the winter they are watched by men day and night. Then Neptune seems most angry at the loss of his territory, and in his rage he drives the sea almost to the top of the dikes. He is always watching for a crack or a break, which he knows he can quickly enlarge. The people appreciate the danger, and they have watchmen to warn them. At critical times the alarm bells are rung, and everyone hurries to help build the dike higher, or to repair it. Notwithstanding all this, the ocean sometimes breaks through, as was the case about 70 years before Columbus discovered America, when a tidal wave swept in, flooding towns and villages, and drowning more than 1,000 people. The canals of Holland are almost as wonderful as the dikes. There are about 2,000 miles of them in the country, some great ship waterways, and other little ditches dividing the fields like fences, the bridges with bars across them serving for gates. The biggest canals connect the great cities of Holland and the sea. Amsterdam has the North Sea Canal, a wide waterway 15 miles long and 25 feet deep. This canal is walled by enormous dikes, and it flows above the rest of the country out to the sea, where there are great gates to keep the ocean from rushing in. In many Dutch cities the canals form the principal streets, and in the country they serve as highways and roads. As we travel through Holland, we see huge ships apparently sailing through the green grass, and sometimes notice their tall masts moving along above the tops of the trees, which now and then line the canals. Here is a boat loaded with wheat hauled along by a horse on the bank. There is one filled with vegetables, dragged onward by two men who bend over and pull at a rope attached to its mast. And there is another, loaded with hay, moved by a woman, a boy, and a dog, all harnessed together. The boy and the woman bend almost double, forcing the boat through the water by throwing their weight against the wide straps over their breasts to which the tow line is fastened. Both wear wooden shoes, and we cannot see how they can move along as they do. Other boats are being pushed onward with poles from the decks, and not a few are aided by sails. But what are those queer long-legged birds we see wading about through the ditches, poking their heads into the mud? Those are storks, and they are after frogs, worms, and other things which live in the canals and the ditches. The storks are great friends of the people, for they eat the reptiles which destroy the dikes and embankments. We see storks' nests in the trees and on the chimneys of the farmhouses, and frequently spy one of the great birds resting on one leg on the roof. Notice the windmills. They stand in rows along the canals, and we often count 100 in sight. Nearly every farmer has one. Each mill consists of a huge tower with arms or sails from 50 to 100 feet long. The tower is so large around that the first story is often used as a house. The most of the windmills are for pumping water from one level to another, in draining the fields, but others grind corn and furnish the motive power for sawmills and factories. Holland is so flat that the winds from the ocean blow as regularly as at sea, and the mills can be relied upon to do their work every day. Many of the country roads are along the canals, and near them are railroads and steam tramways. Holland has a good railroad system, and steam and electric tramways have been built all over the country. We travel mostly on the tramways, stopping now to explore a quaint city or village, and now to chat with the farmers about their cattle and corn. It is summer, but the fresh air from the sea keeps us delightfully cool. How beautiful it is! There are rows of tall willows along many of the canals, and the combination of water and green fields forms ever-changing pictures. We stand on the bridges and watch the fat cattle grazing. How clean they are and how smooth! They look as though they had been curried. They are eating from feeding boxes out in the fields. Although the grass grows luxuriantly, many of the people feed their cows in the pastures, and they know just what food will produce the most milk. The Dutch people are noted for their delicious butter and cheese, which they export so largely to England that Holland is sometimes called the dairy farm of Great Britain. Notice how careful they are of the cattle. Many of the fine cows are covered with blankets to keep off the flies. In the spring they have covers to protect them from the cold rains, and in the winter they are brought into the house and stabled under the same roof as the family. Holland has but few barns. Wood is scarce and all stone has to be imported, so the people find it cheaper to build one large house and give up a part of it to hay lofts and cattle than to have separate stables or sheds. The most of the houses have low walls with very high roofs. The walls are whitewashed, and the roofs are of red tile or gray thatch, made so steep that the rain quickly runs off. Every house is kept clean inside and out, even the stable being frequently scrubbed. Most cows have their daily cold bath, and in some stables there is a ring in the rafter over each cow, to which her tail is tied up while milking. In the summer the cows stay in the fields, and the people go out to milk them. See, there is a girl milking now. Her sleeves are rolled up to her elbows, and she sits on the heels of her wooden shoes as she draws out the milk in white streams. There comes a man with a wagon full of brass cans. He has driven across the bridge into the pasture. The girl brings her pailful of milk and pours it into one of the cans and goes on to milk more. The Dutch are excellent farmers. We pass rich fields of wheat, barley, and oats, and see everywhere potatoes and other vegetables growing. We spend some time in the great flower gardens about Haarlem, where they raise the finest of tulips, hyacinths, and gladioli, exporting the bulbs to all countries. More than $1 million worth are shipped away every year, including vast quantities to the United States. The Dutch are fond of flowers, and at one time they went almost wild over tulips. It was at about the time Boston was founded. Then Holland had tulip bulbs that actually sold for their weight in gold, and some that brought much more, for it is said that one kind of bulb, known as the Semper Augustus, was worth an amount equal to $1,500 of our money. The tulip bulb is somewhat like an onion, and a story is told of a rich merchant who was showing one of the bulbs to a friend when a sailor came in and announced that a cargo of silk had arrived. The merchant in his hurry laid down his Semper Augustus, and the sailor, thinking it an onion, picked it up and went away with it. When the merchant came back, he was almost crazy at the loss of his treasure. He rushed through the town looking for the sailor, only to find that the sailor had sliced up the bulb to eat with his lunch before he had found it was a tulip and not an onion. Take a look at that crowd coming up the opposite side of the canal. What good faces they have! Both men and women are rosy-cheeked and bright-eyed. It is a holiday, and they have on their best clothes. The men wear short jackets and full, baggy black velvet trousers, held up by wide belts at the waist and fastened with silver buckles as big as the palm of your hand. They have on caps with wide brims, and their long hair is cut straight off at the neck. The women wear short skirts, and some are bare-armed. What is that bright stuff on their heads? It looks like silver or gold shining out through their lace caps. There are horns of gold sticking out on each side of their eyes. Those are the helmets which many Dutch women and girls wear on special occasions. They are thin plates of gold or silver, or imitations of those metals, so made that they fit the head like a cap, almost covering the hair. The gold ones are very costly, and are kept in the family from one generation to another. Now, look at their feet. Did you ever see such shoes? They are as white as newly planed pine. They are wood, and though they look clumsy, they serve very well, especially in a damp country like Holland, where it rains so frequently that the ground is often as soft as a sponge. There comes a party of little children. Their fathers and mothers are watching us from the bank, and the little ones have stopped for a moment to play. They are dressed much like their parents. How they run over the ground in their thick wooden shoes! I am sure not one of us could run any faster. Observe how the little ones greet their parents, and how they hold on to them as they stand open-mouthed and stare at our boat. The Dutch are fond of their children. They send them to school and give them quite as many advantages as we have at home. There are few better people educated than the people of Holland, and there are none who have more of the elements which make up really good men and good women. They have had to fight so hard to build up their country and keep back the sea, that they have become strong and self-reliant. They have had to watch their dikes so carefully that they have grown cautious, and the long continued work of building the dikes has made them patient and industrious. Being on the sea, they have become a nation of traders, and have grown rich by their thrift. There is one thing for which the Dutch are especially noted. All travelers speak about it. Look around and see if you can guess what it is. Observe the fresh paint on the bridges, the new whitewash on the houses. Look down on the deck of our canal boat. See how it has been scoured until it is white as snow. How clean everything is. The Dutch are famous for keeping things clean. They are so neat that it is sometimes oppressive. We walk on our tiptoes when we enter the houses, for the floors fairly shine, and the front steps are washed every day. In our early morning walks through the city we have to go carefully to keep from being spattered with water. Bare-armed housemaids in white caps and short dresses are scrubbing the streets and washing down the house fronts. Each girl has a mop on a long pole so that she can reach every crack and corner. She first washes the windows and walls, and then scrubs off the doorsteps and pavement. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of Geographical Reader. Europe, by Frank G. Carpenter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. Chapter 16. In the Dutch cities, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and The Hague. About one-third of the people of Holland live in towns. There are 30 towns of more than 20,000 inhabitants and several large cities. Amsterdam, the largest city, is as big as Baltimore. Rotterdam, which is the chief seaport, is as big as Buffalo. And The Hague, the capital of Holland, is about the size of Indianapolis. Amsterdam and Rotterdam have ship canals connecting them with the ocean, so that big vessels come into the cities to load and unload. Almost all the Dutch towns are cut up by canals, and in some the waterways are so many that they largely take the place of streets, boats containing all kinds of goods being dragged through them. The city canals are walled with stone, and the ways along their banks smoothly paved. In some places the houses are built close to the canals, so that the children can easily lean out of the windows and drop their fishing lines into the water, or, in the winter, when everything is frozen, can put on their skates inside the house and slide off to school. In both city and country, a large part of the winter travel and traffic of Holland is on the ice of the canals. The Dutch cities have fine buildings. They have beautiful palaces, large stores and banks, free libraries and museums, schools of all kinds, concert halls and theaters, public gardens and parks. The people dwell in large houses, several families often living in the same house. Let us take a stroll through Amsterdam and see for ourselves how a Dutch city looks. We start at the Dam, the chief public square. This is one of the great business centers. Here are the Stock Exchange, the King's Palace, and many fine stores and hotels. We climb up the steps inside the palace tower, and when we come out at the top we are high above the biggest city of the Netherlands. Look at the vast expanse of red tiled roofs below us. They are ridge shaped, and out of their sides little dormer windows faced with white curtains protrude. See the broad canals running in all directions through the red field. There are almost as many canals here as in Venice. They divide the city up into islands, and 300 bridges are required to connect the islands with one another. Notice the ships moving along through the streets. In the wider canals the masts are above the roofs of the houses. Isn't it strange? Now look beyond the red field of houses. See that great silver sheet out there upon which the sun dances? That is the wide Zuyder Zee, and that canal going through it, bearing a stately line of ships, is Amsterdam's chief highway to the ocean. Now look down at the docks in the city. This is one of the great shipping nations of Europe. There are vessels from Java, Sumatra, and almost every other port of the world. Amsterdam has been a noted port for centuries, and although Rotterdam has now the more shipping, Amsterdam is still one of the chief coffee and spice markets. The Dutch have many colonies in the East and West Indies, and their great steamers are always carrying goods to the colonies and bringing sugar, coffee, and spices and other things home. The Dutch own more than 60 times as much land outside Holland as in the whole of Holland itself. Now turn your eyes again from the water to the land. See the green fields beyond the red city, striped with silvery canals. Those white spots on the landscape are cattle, and the little round towers, each flinging its arms about in circular motion as though it were practicing some new exercise with Indian clubs, are windmills. What a lot of towns and villages there are scattered over the country. Those white cottages are the homes of the farmers. Let us climb down and take a walk through the streets. How tall the houses are, and how sharp their peaked roofs. Most of them are of 5 and 6 stories. Many lean far from the perpendicular, as though about to topple over into the canals, or to fall on the shoulders of their neighbors across the way. There is a new house just going up, and farther on foundations are being laid. Let us stop and see how they are working. The men are driving great piles down into the earth. The land beneath Amsterdam is as soft as a swamp, and these streets and all the houses and buildings about us are standing on the tops of trees driven down into the ground. This made Erasmus, a noted scholar of Rotterdam, say that the people of Amsterdam live like birds in the tree tops. Sometimes the piles settle unevenly, causing the buildings to lean. They seldom fall down, however, so we may walk on and feel perfectly safe. Nevertheless, we must be careful at the bridges, for many of them are moved about now and then to let the boats through, and a stray step might drop us into the water. Take another look at the houses. See how clean they are and how neat. Observe those little mirrors set at right angles with the walls just outside each window. Can it be that the people lean out for fresh air while making their toilets? No, those mirrors are to let the owners learn what is going on in the street without looking out. They are so arranged that a woman can knit away in her chair and see all who pass by. She can see her callers before they ring the doorbell, and can watch her children coming home from school when they are still blocks away. Let us enter one of the stores. The prices marked on the goods are in Dutch, and it takes some time for us to tell just what things cost. The Dutch money is in guldens, or florins, and cents. A gulden is a silver coin a little larger than our 25-cent piece. It is worth 100 Dutch cents, or 40 cents of our money. There are half guldens, quarter guldens, 10th guldens, and 20th guldens, each of which has its own name. The quarter gulden is called a kwartje, the 10th a dubbeltje, and the 20th a stuiver, the last being worth about 2 cents of our money. There are copper cents and half cents, each worth respectively 2/5 and 1/5 of an American cent. There is also a silver coin, the 2 1/2 gulden piece, the size of our dollar, and there are gold pieces worth 10 guldens, or $4 in our money. We spend a 10 gulden piece in making purchases, and in change for our gold are given a handful of kwartjes, dubbeltjes, and stuivers, and also a good lot of Dutch cents. It really seems that we have more money now than when we came in, and we generously reward the first beggar we meet with 10 copper coins, which are worth not more than 2 cents. Fortunately, our merchant speaks English, and we have no trouble in making ourselves understood. We find the Dutch language difficult to pronounce, and make our way about by signs when our guides are not with us. The Dutch is one of the Teutonic tongues, being somewhat like a mixture of German and English. Leaving the stores, we visit the factories. The Netherlands have no coal fields of value, and hence there are fewer factories here than in France, Belgium, or England. Still the cities can get cheap coal from abroad, for they are situated close to the sea, and besides, the wind aids the steam in running their mills. The Dutch import quantities of raw silk and wool, and a great deal of our cotton, and they make excellent cloth of all kinds. They are noted for their manufactures of china and of many kinds of machinery, as well as for their gin, a spirituous liquor. There is one thing that requires great skill which the Dutch do better than any other people. I wonder if you can guess what it is. You need not look in Holland for the reason, for this business has nothing to do with anything raised here. It is connected with mines. Is it composed of gold, iron, silver, copper, or zinc? No, although they may furnish tools to aid in the work. It has to do with the diamond, the costliest precious stone upon earth. Amsterdam is the chief place of the whole world for polishing and dressing diamonds so that they will shine most beautifully and be of the most value. As the diamonds come from the mines, they are rough and misshapen, and often have flaws which lessen their brilliancy. In 1456, a Belgian jeweler named Berghem discovered that rubbing one diamond over another wore off a little of each, and that if he took the powder made by the rubbing, he could use it to smooth diamonds. The diamond, you know, is the hardest of stones. It is so hard that only a diamond will cut it, and only diamond dust can be used in polishing diamonds. After Berghem made this discovery, jewelers began to study how to make diamonds more beautiful. The Dutch engaged in the business, and with their wonderful patience and skill, became so proficient that they now polish diamonds better than any one else. They know just how to split them so as to remove the flaws, and how to grind them into prismatic shapes so that they will blaze under the light like balls of fire. There are more than 60 factories for dressing diamonds in Amsterdam, and some of them employ hundreds of hands, including many women and girls. We enter one of the diamond cutting establishments and are first shown how diamonds are split. This is done to remove the flaws. They can be split at the flaws, and by using one sharp diamond cemented into a handle as a knife, a rough diamond can be split up into pieces, each of which is pure or without flaws. The work is carefully done, for a wrong stroke might easily destroy a stone worth thousands of dollars. The next operation is cutting the pure diamond into shape. This is done by rubbing it with diamonds which have been cemented into handles, and by pressing it on a revolving plate upon which diamond dust mixed with oil has been spread. The plate, moved by steam, makes about 1,500 revolutions a minute, and the little grains of diamond dust gradually wear off the roughness from the diamond till it assumes the prismatic forms which it has when it is set into jewelry. Notice how carefully the polishers work, and how they save every grain of the dust. The rubbing and polishing is all done over metal boxes, into which the dust falls. Every bit of it is saved to polish other diamonds, or, it may be, is spread upon a steel wire to make diamond saws, which will gradually cut their way through these hardest of stones. Many of the diamond workers are quite poor. We observe that they are dressed in rough clothes, and that some look pale and wan. It is said to think that although they are always working upon stones worth hundreds of dollars, they really receive smaller wages than our workers in iron. The grinding is confining, and it is trying to the eyes, for some of the diamonds are so small that it takes 800 of them to weigh a carat. The larger diamonds are set for jewelry, but the smaller and imperfect ones are used in the arts. Many are bought by glaziers to cut glass. Some are made into tools for splitting and polishing hard stones, and for boring, engraving, and the like. Leaving the diamond factory, we take the cars for Delft, where a famous china, decorated in delicate blue with paintings of windmills, ships, canals, and other Dutch scenes, is made. The trip is a short one, and we are soon walking through one large room after another, where Dutch boys and men are molding the clay, and with lathes are turning it into dishes and ornamental figures. We watch the men take their work to the ovens, where it is kept under an intense fire for 30 hours, and then taken out to be painted. After this it is dipped into a bath of white glaze, and then fired again, so that the pictures are actually burned into the china. From Delft we make a quick railroad journey to The Hague, the capital of Holland. It is a beautiful city of over 200,000 people, situated 3 miles from the shore of the North Sea and 32 miles from Amsterdam. We spend a day strolling about through its wide streets. They are paved with brick and lined with shade trees with seats under them. There are many canals and great vat-like ponds here and there in the heart of the city. We visit the museum and the picture galleries, and afterwards go to the palace of the Queen and spend some time in the Houses of Parliament. The Dutch government is a limited monarchy. It has a queen and a congress called the States General. The latter is elected by the people, so that in reality the Dutch are almost as free as we are. Leaving The Hague, we go by tramway to Holland's most fashionable watering place, situated about 3 miles away on the shores of the North Sea. We ride to it through a forest park, where the trees stand so close to the sides of the railroad that their branches meet overhead. We seem to be riding through a long, high arbor of green, our heads almost touching the leaves as we go. We each pay a dubbeltje for a seat on the top of the car. There are ladies and gentlemen riding along on both sides of the roadway, and there are so many people on fine horses that we are reminded of the gay throng we saw in Rotten Row in Hyde Park, London. At last we arrive at the watering place. It is called Scheveningen, the name of a fishing village near by. As we get down from the car, we see a group of queerly clad fishwives walking along in wooden clogs, bending half over as they carry great baskets of fish on their backs to The Hague. Passing these, we go to the beach. The tide is coming in, and the waves of the blue North Sea are rolling over one another, making great lines of foam as they dash upon the sand. How different the scenes are from those of our seashore at Atlantic City, Cape May, or Long Branch. There are large hotels some distance back from the water, but the beach is covered with what look like giant bonnets or hoods. They are great wicker chairs, so made that the people sitting within them are protected from the wind and sun, provided they turn their chairs the right way. There are hundreds of such hoods on the beach, and at first we wonder whether they are not some kind of sea monsters sunning themselves on the sands, and if they will not soon get up and walk off. See the Dutch children playing about. They are enjoying themselves just as we do at the seashore. Some are digging out forts or building castles, waiting for the tide to wash them away. Some are burying their playmates in the sand, and some are riding over the beach upon donkeys. We hire donkeys ourselves and race along with them, paying only 1 kwartje, or about 10 cents of our money, for a ride of an hour. After a gallop we hire suits and refresh ourselves with a saltwater bath in the North Sea. We do not wade out from the shore as at home, but hire little bathhouses on wheels. As we enter, men push and pull them far out into the water. There we undress, put on our bathing suits, crawl down the steps, and plunge into the surf. When we have finished our swim, we climb back into our little cab houses, put on our clothes, and then are pulled back to the shore. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of Geographical Reader, Europe by Frank G. Carpenter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. Chapter 17. The Land of the Danes. We decide to visit Denmark, Sweden, and Norway before beginning our tour of the great German Empire. We are tired of traveling by land and therefore take ship at Rotterdam for Copenhagen. Our steamer carries us through the canal into the North Sea and up through the Skagerrak, about the peninsula of Jutland, and down through the Kattegat into the long narrow sound which separates the Danish island of Zealand from Sweden, and which forms the principal entrance to the Baltic. Denmark has been called the keeper of the Baltic. It consists of the northern part of the peninsula of Jutland and the islands to the east, with some smaller islands outside. It is a little country not more than twice as big as New Jersey, but it almost blocks the entrance to this vast inland sea. The sound where we now are is only 70 miles long, and a little more than a mile wide at its narrowest point. But nevertheless it is the chief gate through which the ships that carry on the commerce of Scandinavia, North Germany, and Russia must pass on their way to and from the ocean. There is another passage, but the sound is by far the safer and better. What a lot of shipping there is all about us! There are Russian vessels from St. Petersburg, German vessels from Lubeck, Stettin, and Kiel, Danish vessels from all ports, and vessels from New York, London, and Havre. Now we are passing Elsinore, the little city which was the scene of Shakespeare's play of Hamlet, and which has in times past been very important to this part of the world. Elsinore was the place where all the ships passing through the strait had to stop and pay toll. The Danes once owned not only the island of Zealand on the right, but also that part of Sweden on the left. They controlled this gate into the Baltic and made every ship which passed through pay well for the privilege. It was largely from this system of tolls that Copenhagen became a great city. It has an excellent harbor, and the ships stop there on their way through. The word Copenhagen means merchant's haven. After a time many men came to Copenhagen to buy and sell goods, and the Danes sent their ships from there to all parts of the world, so that it has grown into a great commercial center. Later on Denmark entered into the treaties which made the sound free to all nations. This has so increased the commerce that thousands of vessels now pass through it every year. The most of the ships stop at Copenhagen. The result is that Copenhagen is one of the principal ports of northern Europe. It is as big as Detroit, and is important not only as the capital of Denmark, but also because it is the chief manufacturing and industrial city of the country. We find the harbor filled with vessels as we steam in by the great forts and come up to the wharves. We push our way through the crowds of men who are loading and unloading the ships, and then, having sent our baggage on to the hotel, start out for a walk. How clean the streets are! They are narrow but well paved and well kept. So many of them have canals that we are reminded of Amsterdam. There are cars and carriages moving this way and that. Great drays are carrying freight to and from the docks, and the business streets are crowded with foot passengers. The buildings are chiefly of stone or light-colored brick, with tiled roofs. Notice the stores. Many are on the second floor, and we have to go upstairs to do most of our shopping. We pass large churches and other big buildings. We go to the stock exchange, and then visit the palace in which the king lives. Later in the day we spend an hour in the Danish Parliament, and through our interpreter try to learn something about the government. The Danish Parliament, or Congress, is called the Riksdag. The Danes have a king, but they decide for themselves through the Riksdag what the laws are to be, how much they are to be taxed, and just how the money from the taxes shall be spent. The Riksdag is composed of two houses. The upper one is called the Landsthing. It is much like our Senate, but some of its members are appointed by the king, and others are selected from the chief taxpayers of the country. The lower house is called the Folkething. In this all the members are chosen by the vote of the people. No man is allowed to vote until he is 30 years old. Leaving the palace, we take a stroll through the beautiful parks for which Copenhagen is noted. We spend some time in the Tivoli garden, listening to the music of the bands and watching the children play about on the green. We visit the Thorwaldsen Museum, and then make a photograph of the bronze statue of Hans Christian Andersen, of whom the Danes are so proud. You may or may not have heard of Thorwaldsen, the great sculptor, but every boy and girl ought to know of Hans Christian Andersen, for he composed some of the most beautiful stories ever written for children, among which are The Tin Soldier, The Ugly Duckling, The Match Girl, and How Little Tuk learned his geography lesson in his sleep. Hans Christian Andersen was born in the Danish town of Odense. He was the son of a poor shoemaker, and his mother wanted to make him a tailor, but he was fond of books, and told her he would rather go away and try to become famous by writing. He had only about $5 when he arrived in Copenhagen, but he worked and studied, and after many misfortunes succeeded in getting a good education. When his stories were published, they were liked so well that kings and princes invited him to their palaces to have him read to them. He traveled much, but his last days were spent in Copenhagen. Here all the children knew him. The boys took off their hats when they met him, and the girls bowed. He was a kind old man, and told them many stories, often seeking out children who were sick to amuse them. He died here in 1875, and the people erected this statue. In the statue the great storyteller is sitting. On one side of the pedestal has been engraved a picture from The Ugly Duckling, and on another side a little child riding on the back of a stork. Before leaving Denmark, we take a railroad train for a rapid run over the country. It is nearly all flat, and the greater part of it is pasture. This is so, not only in Jutland, but in the Danish islands as well. There are rich crops of wheat, oats, and rye in some places, and now and then a patch of potatoes. We see many beech trees, and the roads are frequently lined with them. The pastures, however, are more important than anything else. How well the grass grows! See the fat cattle feeding upon it. There are many dairies, and we stop now and then to watch the men and women making butter and cheese. Denmark is one of the best dairy countries of the world, and I doubt whether there is any other land which produces so much butter in proportion to its size. Denmark annually exports to England alone more than $30 million worth of butter, and it sends butter in tin cans to all out-of-the-way parts of the world, where the people, for any reason, do not make butter themselves. It ships millions of eggs and a great deal of bacon and other kinds of meat. Now we are passing through one of the small Danish towns. It has but one long street, bordered by quaint one-story houses with white walls and roofs of red tiles. The houses are neat, and the people seem healthy and happy. Notice their rosy cheeks, their light hair and blue eyes. They are comfortably dressed and seem well-to-do. The Danes are noted for their thrift. They are industrious and economical, and many of them have money in the savings banks which are to be found everywhere. The Danes are intelligent. All children are compelled to go to school from the age of 7 to 14, and there are few men or women who cannot read and write. But how dark it is growing! We can see only a short distance outside the car windows. The wind has blown the fog in from the ocean, and the country about us is enveloped in mist. Denmark is so low and so surrounded by seas that it is often covered with fog. It frequently blows hard, and there are also sandstorms, which are very unpleasant. End of chapter 17.